Look closely at this moment. Donald Trump, standing on a glittering stage in Davos, Switzerland, the world's richest leaders in the audience. Cameras flashing, applause rolling through the hall. And with one signature, he claims he's about to change the future of Gaza and maybe the future of global peace itself. He calls it the Board of Peace, a brand new international body, a billion-dollar membership club, a chairman with sweeping veto power. And here's the line that's sending shockwaves around the world. Gaza was the reason this board was created, but Gaza is not mentioned even once in its official charter. So what exactly did Trump just launch in Davos? Is this a genuine peace effort or the most ambitious geopolitical power grab of his presidency? And why are Palestinians calling it detached from reality, while European allies quietly refuse to sign? Stay with me, because what just happened in Davos could reshape Gaza, the Middle East, and global diplomacy for years to come. On January 22nd, 2026, U.S. President Donald Trump stood before the world at the World Economic Forum in Davos and formally launched what he calls the Board of Peace. It was billed as a historic signing ceremony. Trump announced the first charter of this new international body, a body he says will resolve conflicts, rebuild war zones, and bring long-term stability to regions torn apart by violence. The Board of Peace was first pitched as a mechanism to oversee the rebuilding of Gaza after 2 brutal years of war. But as journalists finally saw the full charter, something didn't add up. The 11-page document never mentions Gaza. Not once. Instead, it creates a broad, powerful new organization with authority to intervene in areas affected or threatened by conflict anywhere in the world. And at the very top of this structure sits Donald Trump himself, as chairman, with veto power, with final authority over how the charter is interpreted, with control over membership removal and executive board actions. In other words, this isn't just about Gaza anymore. This is about global power. To understand why this moment matters so much, we have to go back to September last year at the UN General Assembly. That's when Trump first floated the idea of a small international group that would supervise the Gaza ceasefire, manage reconstruction funds, and stabilize the territory after the October 2025 ceasefire. At the time, Gaza was devastated. More than 2 years of war had flattened neighborhoods, collapsed hospitals, destroyed water systems, and displaced entire families. International donors were hesitant. The UN was overstretched, and Trump saw an opening, a chance to position the United States and himself as the ultimate dealmaker once again. The White House formally announced the creation of the Board of Peace just last week. It was sold as practical, technocratic, focused, a way to get things done where the UN had failed. But behind the scenes, the scope quietly expanded. Invitations went out to dozens of countries. The charter was drafted, and Gaza slowly faded from the center of the mission. Let's walk through how we got here. September 2025. Trump proposes a Gaza-focused oversight body at the UN. October 2025. A fragile ceasefire comes into effect between Israel and Hamas. December 2025. Quiet diplomatic outreach begins. Countries are asked if they join a US-led board to oversee Gaza's future. Early January 2026. The White House confirms the Board of Peace will be launched at Davos. Mid-January 2026. Drafts of the charter circulate among governments. Concerns start to grow. January 22nd, 2026. Trump arrives in Davos. 7 executive board members take the stage. The charter is signed, and the world finally sees what this thing really is. Key people and organizations involved. At the center of it all, Donald Trump, chairman of the Board of Peace. Final authority, veto power, interpreter of the charter. Then there's the 7-member executive board. Tony Blair, former British Prime Minister, a deeply controversial choice in the Arab world. Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, architect of Trump's Middle East policy. A man who once said Gaza had very valuable waterfront property. Marco Rubio, U.S. Secretary of State. Steve Witkoff, Trump's Middle East envoy. Mark Rowan, CEO of Apollo Global Management. Ajay Bunga, President of the World Bank Group. Robert Gabriel, U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor. And then there's the wider Board of Peace membership. Countries that have agreed to join include Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Qatar, Pakistan, Turkey, UAE, Jordan, Morocco, Indonesia, Argentina, and many more. But notice who's missing: the Palestinians. There is no Palestinian representative on the executive board. Any name suggested by the Palestinian Authority was reportedly vetoed by Israel. And Palestinians were not given a seat, even on the committee meant to address Gaza's day-to-day needs. Because this isn't just another diplomatic headline. This is about who controls the future of Gaza, who controls billions of dollars in reconstruction money, who gets to decide what peace actually looks like, and who gets left out of the room. If this board succeeds, it could become the most powerful parallel institution to the United Nations in decades. If it fails, it could deepen mistrust, prolong instability, and cement a future Palestinians had no voice in shaping. Let's start in Gaza. On the ground, the reaction is raw. Palestinians are not talking about committees or charters. They're talking about bombs, food, cold nights, dead children, and empty homes. One reporter in central Gaza put it bluntly: people here do not measure peace by boards or charters. They measure it by whether the bombs stop and whether food enters. There's a deep feeling that Palestinians are being discussed as a problem to manage, not as people with rights. That those associated with the destruction of Gaza are now being elevated into decision-making roles, and that the word peace has been stripped of its meaning. In the West Bank, the reaction is even angrier. Settler violence is rising. Homes are being burned. Villages are being erased. Journalists are being killed in Gaza. And yet in Davos, world leaders are applauding a ceremony. European allies aren't convinced either. The UK refused to sign. France refused. Norway refused. Sweden refused. Slovenia refused. They're concerned that the Board of Peace undermines the United Nations, that it creates a rival global authority, that Russia's involvement is dangerous, and that Trump has too much unilateral power. Here's the part few people are talking about. The charter does not mention Gaza at all, not once. Instead, it gives the board authority to intervene anywhere conflict exists or might exist. That means Ukraine, Africa, the Middle East, Asia, anywhere. And Trump, as chairman, gets veto power, final authority, interpretation rights. This isn't just a peace board. It's a global influence machine. Another hidden angle? Money. Despite denials of a $1 billion entry fee, countries are expected to contribute heavily to Gaza reconstruction, which means Trump effectively controls a massive international funding stream. And then there's Jared Kushner, the same man who once suggested Gaza's population be moved out so the land could be cleaned up. The same man whose family has close ties to Netanyahu, now sitting at the heart of Gaza's future. So what happens now? First, the board will begin setting budgets, policies, and operational rules. Second, countries will decide whether to formally join or stay out. Third, the board will likely attempt to insert itself into Gaza governance and reconstruction. Fourth, the UN will face a direct challenge to its authority. And finally, Palestinians will be forced to live with decisions made by a body they had no role in creating. This could lead to one of two futures. Either the Board of Peace becomes a functional reconstruction mechanism that stabilizes Gaza, or it becomes a symbol of imposed peace, deepening resentment, and sowing the seeds of future conflict. So here we are, a world still burning with wars, a Gaza still bleeding, a West Bank still under siege, and a man in Davos declaring himself chairman of global peace. Is this the beginning of a new diplomatic era, or the moment the rules of international power quietly changed? Because one thing is clear: peace cannot be signed into existence. It cannot be imposed from a stage in Switzerland, and it cannot be real if the people most affected are not even in the room. The Board of Peace has been born, but whether it brings peace or something far more dangerous, the world is about to find out. And so are the people of Gaza. Stay watching. And now, as the applause fades in Davos, another, much darker reality keeps unfolding thousands of kilometers away. Because while Donald Trump is signing charters and promising peace, Gaza is still being bombed. Journalists are still being killed. Families are still being displaced. And in the West Bank, entire villages are being wiped off the map. This contrast, this brutal, almost surreal disconnect, is what makes the launch of the Board of Peace so disturbing to so many people. Let's talk about Gaza, because everything about this board was supposedly built around Gaza's future. Since the ceasefire came into effect in October 2025, more than 480 Palestinians have been killed. That includes at least 169 children, at least 64 women, and just in the last few days, 3 journalists were killed while documenting humanitarian relief efforts. Witnesses say they were in a civilian vehicle. The Israeli military says they were operating a drone. No independent evidence has been produced. And this is the environment in which Trump is now promising peace. This is the reality Palestinians are living in, while men in suits talk about governance frameworks and economic corridors. Now look at the West Bank. Settler violence has exploded. Homes are being burned. Agricultural lands are being destroyed. Water sources are being cut off. Entire communities are being forced to flee. In one village, Ras Ain al-Aja, almost every single family has now left. Their sheep were stolen or poisoned. Their spring was taken over by settlers. Their homes were dismantled. Some families burned their own furniture before leaving, just so settlers couldn't use it. And Israeli forces? They're not stopping it. They're often protecting it. In Tulkarem, Israeli troops moved through the streets overnight. Threatening stickers were posted on walls. Surveillance drones were flown over markets. Cars were rammed. Homes were demolished. And yet, not one word about this appears in the Board of Peace Charter. Not one. This is why Palestinians are furious. This is why they say the board is detached from their reality. Because from their point of view, peace is not a conference. Peace is not a charter. Peace is not a billion-dollar fund. Peace is when the bombs stop. Peace is when food enters. Peace is when children don't freeze at night. Peace is when soldiers stop raiding homes. Peace is when settlers stop burning villages. And none of that has changed, not even slightly. Now let's talk about the most explosive detail of all. Benjamin Netanyahu has a seat on the Board of Peace. For Palestinians, this is not just offensive. It is traumatizing. Netanyahu is seen by them as the man responsible for mass killings, for the flattening of Gaza, for displacement on a historic scale, for the destruction of civilian life. And now, he is being branded a peacemaker. Can you imagine how that feels? To be bombed, to be displaced, to lose your family, and then to see the man you blame sitting on a peace council deciding your future? That single decision alone may have doomed the board in the eyes of Palestinians before it even began. Now zoom out to Europe, because something very unusual is happening. Major U.S. allies are saying no to a Trump-led global institution. The U.K. refused to sign. France refused. Norway refused. Sweden refused. Slovenia refused. Their reasons? They say the board undermines the United Nations. They say it creates a parallel international order. They say it gives Trump far too much power. They say Russia's involvement makes it morally and politically unacceptable. And they are deeply uncomfortable with the legal implications of the charter. In diplomatic language, this is a quiet revolt. It's Europe saying, we don't trust this. And then there's Russia. President Vladimir Putin is expected to meet Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Moscow. Russia is positioning itself as a key diplomatic player in Gaza's future. And several countries are deeply uneasy about Putin having any role in a so-called peace institution. While Russia is still at war in Ukraine, this contradiction is impossible to ignore. And it's one of the main reasons Britain publicly refused to sign. Now here's where things get truly historic. The Board of Peace is not just about Gaza. It's about power. It's about replacing the United Nations as the center of global conflict resolution. The charter gives the board authority to act anywhere conflict exists. Anywhere. And Trump, as chairman, gets veto power, final authority, interpretation rights. That means if the board and the UN disagree, Trump wins. This is unprecedented. No American president has ever created a private global governance body with this level of authority. And that's why diplomats are terrified. Now follow the money. Countries are expected to contribute massive funds to Gaza reconstruction. Even if there's no formal entry fee, the financial pressure is real. And whoever controls those funds controls Gaza, controls infrastructure, controls housing, controls electricity, controls water, controls borders. And who sits at the top of that system? Donald Trump. This isn't just diplomacy. It's financial dominance. And we have to talk about Jared Kushner, because his presence alone has ignited outrage. Kushner once said Gaza had very valuable waterfront property. He suggested Israel should move the people out and clean it up. Those words never went away. They are burned into Palestinian memory. And now, he is helping design Gaza's future. This is why Arab and Muslim countries are openly furious about Tony Blair and Kushner being on the executive board. They see this as colonial planning, not peace. Now let's pause here, because something deeper is happening. This board is not just shaping policy. It is shaping how Palestinians see the world. It tells them, your suffering is negotiable. Your displacement is manageable. Your rights are secondary. Your voice is optional. That kind of message doesn't bring peace. It creates rage, and rage always finds an outlet. If this board moves forward as designed, the Middle East is entering a new phase, a phase where the U.S. bypasses the UN. Israel is legitimized as a peacemaker. Palestinians are excluded from decisions, and Trump becomes the ultimate global mediator. That combination is explosive. Right now, the world is standing at a fork in the road. Future one. The Board of Peace becomes a real reconstruction mechanism. Violence decreases. Borders open. Food enters Gaza. Homes are rebuilt. Settlers are restrained. And a genuine political process begins. Future 2. The board becomes a tool of imposed order. Gaza is economically rebuilt, but politically strangled. Palestinians remain under occupation. The UN is sidelined, and resentment hardens into something far worse. So ask yourself this. If peace is real, why are bombs still falling? If peace is coming, why are journalists still being killed? If peace is the goal, why are Palestinians not even at the table? And if this board is about justice, why does it give all the power to one man? The Board of Peace has been born in Davos, in a room full of billionaires, presidents, and power brokers. It was signed with smiles, with applause, with promises. But peace does not live in conference halls. It lives in homes that are still standing, in children who still breathe, in journalists who are still alive, in villages that still exist. And right now, those things are disappearing. The world has just witnessed the launch of a new global order. Whether it becomes a bridge to peace or a weapon of control will be decided not in Davos, but in Gaza and in the West Bank and in the lives of people who were never invited to the room. This story is not over. In many ways, it has only just begun.